4 major forces gathered at Lark Manor, and the battle to protect the shelter officially began. Just after the Radiant Prosperity base was sniped and fled in disarray, Xiao Honglian made a call to Wei Dinghai. At that time, both had the same idea. They wanted the other to also experience the feeling of being hunted by a sniper. Xiao Honglian told Wei Dinghai, "Our journey is quite long, and we will probably be the last to arrive, but it won't delay the agreed time for the attack." Wei Dinghai said indifferently, "What a coincidence. We haven't arrived yet either. I was just about to ask about your current situation." After hanging out, both thought to themselves, "You guys should hurry up and experience being sniped too." Seeing that he had driven away 2 groups of people, Zhang Yi started to get bored. He proudly started the intercom with a few people. "These people are too weak. I barely made a move and took out dozens of them. Seeing them flee in panic really makes me want to laugh." Chun Lei looked up admiringly. "Boss is really powerful. Dealing with these minions is not that interesting. We should aim to kill the mutants, especially since we are on the front lines. It would relieve some pressure on us." Zhang Yi replied indifferently, "I can try, but the prospects are not great. After all, the mutants who have survived until now, especially those from the enhanced and beastman strains, cannot be fatally wounded by ordinary thermal weapons. You know that I only double my strength against weaker opponents. If the opponent is too strong, I run faster than you guys. My rebound attack ability has already been discovered by the enemy, so there should be no pressure from long-range firearms for now. With this, the first line of defense can hold out longer, especially since breaking through a city wall of ice and snow several meters thick without heavy weapons is very difficult. Who will be the next to experience my bullets?" Through his tactical scope, Zhang Yi quickly spotted a large group of approaching foot soldiers, at least 1,000, densely packed. Zhang Yi was slightly shocked. Shooting these people is simply a waste of bullets. He immediately informed the others, "The people from the Snow Worship sect have also arrived." Uncle Yu asked rationally, "Didn't we say yesterday that the Snow Worship sect and the Emerald Waterside base are our own people? What if they join the charge later? Do we kill them or not?" Zhang Yi answered without hesitation, "Anyone who dares approach the defensive line, no matter who it is, must be killed without mercy." With these words, Uncle Yu's expression relaxed significantly. He lifted a tarp in front of him, revealing a large amount of ammunition and 2 Gatling guns underneath. After the Snow Worship sect arrived, Jing Yixian immediately sensed something was amiss. Logically, Radiant Prosperity and Morning Dew should have already arrived, but the scene was eerily silent. Little did he know that both had independently decided to pretend they had not yet arrived, wanting the other to suffer first. However, the Snow Worship sect had never really intended to play a deadly game with Zhang Yi. Jing Yixian told his subordinates, "If Zhang Yi can withstand their assault and deplete the strength of the other factions, we will deliver a painful blow from behind. If Zhang Yi is easily defeated, we will have to break our promise and share Zhang Yi's shelter with them." Soon after, the forces from Emerald Waterside also grandly arrived. Their vehicles were primitive, but they had a large number of robust sled dogs. They brought over 500 warriors, and there were plenty of guns and ammunition on the sleds. After the 4 forces had successively arrived, Xiao Honglian immediately started a group call. "Is everyone in position? According to the original plan, we 4 will attack from 4 directions." Upon hearing this, Xing Tian immediately said, "Leave the rear of the shelter to us." Wei Dinghai expressed some doubt. "There's a mountain behind the residential area. Are you planning to fly over it?" Xing Tian thought to himself, "I'm just here to watch the show. I won't let them know I'm slacking off at the back of the mountain." Then he seriously said, "This kind of low hill is nothing to us. For this reason, their rear defense is definitely the weakest, and I want to catch them by surprise." Seeing the situation, Wei Dinghai could only say, "Then you attack from the rear, and the front will be handled by the 3 of us." At that moment, Xiao Honglian suddenly spoke, "When we arrived, we discovered they have a very strong sniper. You'd better be careful. Also, they seem to have a mutant who can rebound artillery attacks, so be cautious with long-range firepower." Wei Dinghai quickly agreed, "Ah yes, we just encountered that too." Xing Tian and Jing Yixian, however, remained unfazed. They were only there to make a show of it, at most pretending to charge. They were not interested in this intelligence. Before ending the call, Xiao Honglian reminded, "At exactly 2:30, our 4 groups will attack simultaneously from 4 different directions." Soon after, Yang Xinxin sent a call saying, "Brother Zhang Yi, there are enemies appearing from the direction of the back mountain." Yang Xinxin, stationed in the control room, used the surveillance to relay intelligence to everyone. As he spoke, he also transmitted the video feed from the back mountain. Seeing that it was Xing Tian and his group, Zhang Yi instantly understood, this guy really has some brains. Knowing that the back mountain is a better place to slack off, he told Yang Xinxin, "Don't worry about those people, they won't launch an attack." Zhang Yi had already considered the direction of the back mountain when building the defensive line. It was easy to defend and hard to attack, and many landmines had been buried at the foot of the mountain. If they dared to break their promise and attack, it would be tantamount to seeking their own death. Just then, Zhang Yi suddenly shouted in a deep voice, "Everyone, be alert, the enemy has appeared." Dozens of armored vehicles grandly charged toward the shelter. Followers of the Snow Worship sect also charged from another direction with relatively weak firearms and even primitive weapons like big knives and spears. As they came within shooting range, Zhang Yi suddenly shouted, "Fire!" In the control room, Yang Xinxin decisively pressed the button. As the button was pressed, cracks suddenly appeared on the ice and snow city wall, and gun barrels and muzzles emerged from the crevices. The deafening sound of gunfire echoed across the entire front line, instantly turning the scene into a sea of fire. The intense firepower stunned all the major forces. Xing Yishan was particularly shocked, exclaiming, "There are cannons, tanks, and machine guns. My goodness, where did he get these big guys from?" Faced with such fierce firepower, everyone on the scene couldn't believe their eyes. This level of weaponry was only held by the West Mountain Base in the entire Heavenly Sea City. Could it be that Zhang Yi had raided the West Mountain Base's arsenal? How did he manage this in such icy conditions? West Mountain Base indeed had a large stock of heavy weaponry, but since the apocalypse, even moving these behemoths out of storage had been difficult, let alone transporting them here. It was utterly inconceivable. Xiao Honglian immediately ordered, "Spread out immediately. This defense line is just an ice shell. As long as we shatter it, we can approach the shelter, and then we will win." Xiao Honglian remained composed in the face of danger, because she firmly believed that if her people could get close to the shelter, they could breach it. By then, the people inside, including Zhang Yi, would have no choice but to surrender, because Wu Huiran had told her the shelter itself had no weapons defense system. It was merely a solid shell. Meanwhile, on the back mountain side, Xing Tian, who had planned to be a mere spectator, couldn't help but sweat at such a brutal scene. Now he suddenly understood why his old classmate dared to offend them all. His confidence was here. He silently congratulated himself on his wise choice to slack off on the back mountain. Nevertheless, he still told his subordinates, "Everyone, open fire and make a big show of it, but make sure not to hit anyone." A nearby soldier was puzzled. "There's nobody on the back mountain. Isn't firing a waste?" Xing Tian threw a punch and reprimanded, "Stop with the nonsense. I didn't ask you to hit anyone, just to stir up the atmosphere. Since we've taken their things, we must keep our word." "I, Xing Tian, am not the type to kick someone when they're down," Xiao Honglian said to Wei Dinghai. "We might not be able to hold on like this. We underestimated the enemy's firepower." Wei Dinghai pondered, "This guy's firepower is too strong. We must concentrate our firepower to break through the perimeter first." Xiao Honglian urgently shouted, "Their defensive force should be concentrated here. They don't have many people. As long as we break through this ice and snow wall, we can turn the tide of the battle." Hearing this, Wei Dinghai immediately said, "Cover me with your firepower. I'll take care of this wall." Wei Dinghai's Ice Lord had a natural advantage in this environment. Thinking of this, Xiao Honglian immediately ordered, "All units, fire at will," in coordination with Morning Dew Base to breach the ice defense. At that moment, Wei Dinghai jumped out of the vehicle, immediately forming a solid ice armor around himself, and then dived into the snow. Soon after, with a loud boom, Wei Dinghai burst out of the snow. A section of the ice wall instantly shattered, and the mounted guns and cannons were also flipped over. Chun Lei and Uncle Yu were instantly dumbfounded. What the hell is happening? Zhang Yi also noticed the change here. Amidst the swirling snow, he could faintly see a figure covered in ice armor. Once the snow mist cleared, there was Wei Dinghai striking what he thought was a super cool pose and saying, "In this world of ice and snow, I, Wei Dinghai, am your king." Thousands of soldiers stormed into the defense line. Wei Dinghai continued to widen the breach. He pressed his right hand against the wall, and with the activation of his special ability, the massive ice fortress collapsed instantly like it was made of paper. Seeing this, Zhang Yi couldn't help but his pupils shrink. This terrifying ice ability, compared to Chun Lei, is hundreds of times stronger. At this distance, it was too far to unleash his divine might, so Zhang Yi had to tell everyone through the voice communication, "Begin the action." It's expected that the defense line would be breached. After all, it was unrealistic to rely solely on an ice barrier to stop the forces of 4 factions. But no matter, behind the defense line, there are Uncle Yu and Liang Yu among others. Wei Dinghai was reveling in his success at tearing a huge gap, when suddenly a chilling gleam flashed by, aimed directly at his neck. With a swish, Wei Dinghai ducked low, losing his balance and tumbling awkwardly to the ground. However, his cheek was still nicked by the blade. Looking up, he saw a woman holding a long sword, her eyes full of murderous intent, suddenly appearing before him. Wei Dinghai murmured, "To think it could shatter my frost armor." His frost armor was made of ice crystals, theoretically as defensive as vibranium, yet it nearly got his neck chopped off. Thinking this, Wei Dinghai did not wish to engage further in this icy environment, where his abilities allowed him to attack, defend, advance, and retreat. He instantly merged into the underground ice. Liang Yu frowned deeply and shouted, "Fatty, it's your turn." At this, Chun Lei activated his ability, lifting a large block of ice directly. Chun Lei was also shocked. He never expected to encounter another ice ability user. Seeing the situation turning against him, Wei Dinghai had no choice but to emerge from the ice. But as soon as he landed, Liang Yu fiercely slashed at him. With a crack, a half-meter-long gash was opened on Wei Dinghai's chest. He clutched his chest and staggered back several meters, only to see his wound slowly healing. He hadn't expected Zhang Yi's group to have such a formidable close combat expert. Although his mission was accomplished, he no longer wished to continue the fight. fight and turned to disappear into the ice. Liang Yu wanted to continue the pursuit, but in front of her appeared countless soldiers from various bases, recklessly charging forward with various weapons. In response, Liang Yu took a deep breath and resolutely drew her sword and charged into the crowd. Seeing this, Chun Lei was greatly alarmed and yelled at Liang Yu, "Teacher Liang, don't be impulsive." At this point, Zhang Yi said to them, "Let her go. I think she needs to vent. Letting her have a good fight might help release her recent stress. You two just continue to hold the gap. Their mutants are likely coming soon, and what follows will be a tough battle." Thousands of soldiers were charging towards the shelter. Xiao Honglian also seized the moment, took a swig from a gourd, and then spat out a long stream of fire toward the ice defense line, instantly melting the sturdy ice barrier. Seeing this, the allied forces' morale surged, and following Xiao Honglian's command, the werewolf and soldiers dashed towards the breach in the defense like a whirlwind. Just then, a fierce snowstorm erupted at the gap in the defense line as Chun Lei activated his ability, summoning heavy snow to block the gap. At that moment, the giant Flower also stood in front of the gap, roaring furiously at the approaching soldiers. Flower's wild roar even caused some soldiers' eardrums to burst instantly. At this time, Uncle Yu also appeared at the gap, holding a Gatling gun and wrapped in bullet belts. After a roar, he locked the trigger and fiercely opened fire on the incoming soldiers, instantly turning the soldiers in front into a sieve. Meanwhile, outside the defense line, Liang Yu was in a frenzy. Her ability was quite simple, similar to Ling Feng's, enhancing her attributes, whether it was speed, strength, reaction, or even intuition, all were greatly enhanced. Already a martial arts master, with her ability, she was even more formidable. Each slash of her sword resulted in a soldier's death. Her ultimate target was simple, Xiao Honglian, who was not far away, breathing fire. To avenge her fallen students, Liang Yu slashed her way forward, attempting to close in on her. Just then, a sharp chill aimed at her neck came from the side. With a clang, Liang Yu blocked the lethal blow with Dragon's Roar. The werewolf looked at her with a predator's gaze and said, "It's not appropriate to chop down my people like they're vegetables, right?" Hearing this, Liang Yu suddenly burst into intense flames, and her pupils instantly turned a demonic blood red. This state was something even Zhang Yi and Yang Xinxin had never seen before. However, the werewolf, seeing this terrifying form, was not frightened but delighted. He stuck out his crimson tongue and coldly smiled. "Interesting." Saying that, he crouched down into an attack stance. His form began to grow larger, and his claws lengthened significantly. Liang Yu stared intently at the werewolf while slowly sheathing her long sword. She steadied her stance, ready to face the challenge. As a top-level martial arts master, she was proficient in martial arts from various countries, especially in sword techniques. Aiajutsu was one of her most skilled deadly moves. The werewolf also possessed terrifying assault speed and impact. After a ferocious roar, his figure suddenly became elusive, followed by a rapid pounce that swept through like a fierce wind. The werewolf's claws were instantly in front of Liang Yu. Just as the iron claws were inches away from her neck, Liang Yu's eyes turned a fierce red, and her sword was drawn in that instant. With one strike, she severed his arm and sliced across his neck. The werewolf still maintained his charging posture as he passed by Liang Yu. However, after her hand rose and the sword fell, his head and arms slowly fell to the ground. Liang Yu looked towards Xiao Honglian's direction, her desire for revenge still evident. Meanwhile, at the breach, Uncle Yu, Chun Lei, and Flower were defending with all their might, but the three forces also had powerful mutants, and although Uncle Yu turned into a dual Gatling Terminator, he could only kill ordinary soldiers and could not cause substantial damage to the mutants. Suddenly, a blue flash streaked from the side, and the next second, a figure appeared on Uncle Yu. It was Wei Dinghai's assistant, Chen Jingwan, who wrapped around Uncle Yu like a python and began to constrict. Uncle Yu tried to exert force to escape but found no way out. Chen Jingwan smugly said, "Even heavy snipers can't hurt me. Your brute force trying to escape is just a fool's dream." Chen Jingwan's ability was Rubber Man, which was particularly effective against tank-like Uncle Yu. Fortunately, Flower noticed the scene and roared at them both. In terms of physical strength, Chen Jingwan was no match for Uncle Yu. The roar caused his eardrums to burst, nearly knocking him unconscious. Uncle Yu took the opportunity to break free and prepared to burst this guy, but even though he had lost consciousness, he was still tough as a leather candy that couldn't be broken or penetrated. Seeing their mutants joining the fight one by one, Zhang Yi frowned slightly. He knew that continuing this fight was very dangerous for them. He also didn't want any of his team to die because of this. He told everyone through voice communication, "Everyone, immediately retreat to the shelter," including Liang Yu. Upon receiving the order to retreat, everyone began to fight while retreating. Meanwhile, it seemed that Liang Yu might lose her reason and charge forward for revenge, but instead, she simply crouched down, picked up the werewolf's head, and turned to quickly retreat towards the shelter. After all, having fought and killed for so long, her ability had also been severely depleted. If it weren't for the sustenance provided by Yang Mi's food, she might not have been able to fight until now. This time, her efforts were not without reward. At least she had killed a powerful mutant. With the cover of Zhang Yi's sniper rifle, the group quickly retreated back into the shelter. At this point, Zhang Yi looked towards the still slacking members members of the snow worship sect in the distance and decided to punish them. Having fought so hard himself, he could not allow them to reap the benefits without effort. He said to Yang Xinshin in the control room, "Aim all fire at the snow worship sect." After Yang Xinshin's operation, the firepower network directed at the snow worship sect was instantly activated. The sudden barrage caught the snow worship sect off guard, resulting in heavy casualties. Jing Yishan, pointing in Zhang Yi's direction, angrily said, "You, Zhang Yi, really show no respect." However, he also understood that Zhang Yi was angry at their hesitation to act. Seeing this, Jing Yishan could only suppress his anger and thought, "It seems Zhang Yi's defenses were breached, but overall, Zhang Yi hasn't lost out, and we might not gain any advantage. It's time to take action." At this moment, Jing Yishan of the snow worship sect also ordered his followers to start moving towards the shelter. Then, the soldiers began to continuously throw smoke grenades around the shelter, quickly enveloping it in smoke and greatly disrupting Zhang Yi's sniper tactics. Uncle Yu and Chun Lei anxiously came to the rooftop. "Zhang Yi, the shelter has been completely surrounded. What do we do now? Should we abandon the surface buildings and hide underground?" Zhang Yi scoffed. "Why panic? The shelter isn't so easily breached. They don't have missiles." But no sooner had he spoken than a rumbling sound suddenly reached his ears. Through the smoke, a huge construction vehicle could be faintly seen slowly approaching the shelter. Seeing this, Zhang Yi was instantly alarmed and immediately opened a pocket dimension, pulling out boxes of grenades and C4, then told the two of them, "Go to the first floor and stand by. I'll give them a taste of this." Saying this, he shielded the window with a dimensional gate and began frantically throwing grenades and C4 out the window. Before those people could rejoice, a series of violent explosions erupted, instantly causing carnage and cries of agony outside. The grenades and explosives being thrown out of the window didn't stop. After all, Zhang Yi had emptied the entire arsenal of West Mountain Base, and there was no shortage of weapons and ammunition. While throwing, Zhang Yi coldly said, "Foolish guys, thinking you've succeeded by breaching an ice wall? Little do you know, the shelter is my greatest reliance." The shockwaves from the explosions dispersed the smoke, and only then could Zhang Yi see clearly that the person driving the construction vehicle looked familiar. After thinking carefully, he remembered that this person was Wu Huiren, the manager of War Dragon Company. Zhang Yi had entrusted him with building his safe house in this shelter. Zhang Yi muttered, "So you had this up your sleeve. No wonder you were so confident to attack my shelter." As he spoke, Zhang Yi threw a large bundle of explosives at the construction vehicle. Just then, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the construction vehicle, rapidly expanding to over 10 meters tall. He bounced the bombs away like a spring. This was Chen Jingguan, who had nearly strangled Uncle Yu earlier. His ability is Rubber Man, and under normal circumstances, he is virtually immune to all physical damage. Under his escort, the construction vehicle quickly reached the side of the shelter. A long mechanical arm extended from the vehicle and, after finding the right spot, began cutting with golden flames. Xiao Honglian was still directing the battle. She commanded, "Everyone spread out and attack from the sides. Avoid his counterattack angle." This indeed caused Zhang Yi significant trouble. At that moment, the voice system also issued an alert. "The shelter's walls are undergoing high temperature cutting. Damage level 0.001%. Zhang Yi immediately sensed trouble. The wall would eventually be cut through. The shelter was constructed under Wu Huiren's supervision, so he knew exactly where to start cutting to make an opening. Nevertheless, Zhang Yi calmly asked the voice system, "How long until it is completely cut through?" The voice system responded, "Based on the current progress and speed, it will take approximately an hour and a half to completely penetrate." Hearing this, Zhang Yi felt somewhat relieved. "More than an hour? That's enough time for me to kill a lot of people." The walls echoed with the banging sounds of cutting, and Uncle Yu and others on the first floor were also quite worried. Chun Lei anxiously asked Zhang Yi, "Boss, do we need to retreat underground?" At this moment, Zhang Yi responded with a steady voice, "Don't panic, everything is under control." Meanwhile, sitting at the rear, Wei Dinghai and Xiao Honglian felt confident of their victory. In their view, although they had lost quite a few soldiers, as long as they could acquire the supplies from Zhang Yi, the fight would be worth it. Moreover, they could later divide the influence in the West Mountain area, likely replenishing both manpower and resources. At this time, followers of the Snow Worship sect arrived unnoticed among the crowd. Hundreds of Snow Worship sect followers blended into the crowd undetected, and some even embraced two soldiers, immediately pulling the pins on the explosives strapped all over their bodies. Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai were immediately shocked at the rear. How could there be such intense explosions among their soldiers? They had already conducted demoning during the attack, so it couldn't be landmines. Where did these explosives come from? At this time, a subordinate reported, "It's that group of crazies from the Snow Worship sect. They are strapped with explosives, and now they are coming to die with us." Wei Dinghai and Xiao Honglian were horrified by this sudden betrayal, a truly despicable act typical of a cult. But by the time they realized this, it was too late. The casualties of the two bases had already exceeded 70%, just over 300 people left combined, while the Snow Worship sect still retained a large number of forces. Just then, Jing Yixian levitated, controlling two damaged war vehicles, and viciously smashed smashed them down from above onto Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai. Wei Dinghai used his control over ice and snow to block the vehicles, and Xiao Honglian similarly punched another vehicle away. The long-held grudges were released at this moment, and Jing Yixian felt a weight lifted off his shoulders, letting out a maniacal cold laugh. "You two accursed bastards, today is your day to die." The snow worship sect had endured for so long, paying a painful price in every dispute, but to secure a space to survive, they had no choice but to compromise time and again. Now, finally having a chance to breathe freely, he couldn't stop laughing. Under Jing Yixian's command, the snow worship sect launched a furious attack. Zhang Yi watched the entire process from the shelter, and suddenly his lips curled into a smile. Now it's time to finish them off. With the snow worship sect attacking from one side and them from the other, the two bases were caught between a rock and a hard place with no escape. At this moment, Uncle Yu and Chun Lei were eating and replenishing their strength, and it must be said that Yang Mi's ability truly came in handy this time. The food she prepared quickly restored their condition. They began to open the door and rushed out, furiously fighting the enemies in the crowd. Seeing the sudden change in the battle situation, Xing Tian from the back mountain also felt a chill down his spine. How did the snow worship sect suddenly turn traitor? What's going on? Luckily, I had formed an alliance with Zhang Yi, otherwise, today I might have faced the same situation as Radiant Prosperity and Morning Dew. This time they're all fighting desperately, only I remain completely unharmed and even gained 10 tons of supplies. Doesn't this mean that my Emerald Waterside base will dominate Heavenly Sea City from now on? Uncle Yu, carrying 2 Gatling guns and wrapped in bullet belts, wildly sprayed bullets into the crowd. Lian Yu, armed with a single sword, slashed through the enemies like a tiger among sheep, a frenzied slaughter, and Flower transformed into a giant cat and dived into the crowd, ferociously biting. Zhang Yi's shooting was even more ruthless, maintaining a rhythm of one head every 2 seconds in his merciless reaping. A mutant was pondering how to deal with the fierce enemies when suddenly a force of space around his neck began to distort, and with a bang, his head was instantly severed from his body. Until the moment of his death, he probably would not understand how he died. The mutant prepared to counterattack was immediately petrified with fear. The two bases were instantly thrown into disarray. Seeing this, Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai panicked. They hurriedly tried to contact Xing Tian, hoping he could bring his troops to their aid, but Xiao Honglian couldn't get in touch with Xing Tian at all, and at that moment she realized this guy must have also betrayed them. Wei Dinghai also panicked. Just now, he had clearly heard a major attack launched from the back mountain, but until the defenses were breached and the shelter was surrounded, he had not seen a single member of the Emerald Waterside base, which was already very obvious. Wei Dinghai shouted, "All forces from Morning Dew base, retreat." Then he told Xiao Honglian, "It's clear that the 3 bases have conspired together. You'd better order a retreat now, or it might be too late." Xiao Honglian was both angry and shocked. She could never understand how the 3 had come together. But now, anger was useless, and seeing the current situation, continuing the fight would likely lead to complete annihilation. With this in mind, she could only issue the order to retreat. After speaking, she took a fierce swig from her gourd and spat out a blazing fire dragon towards the crowd of the snow worship sect, instantly burning dozens of people to cinders. Xiao Honglian's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and Jing Yixian decided to avoid her wrath for the time being, no longer blocking their retreat. After all, Wei Dinghai and Xiao Honglian were the top combatants of their bases, and ordinary soldiers and regular mutants could hardly stop them. Now that his goal of weakening them was achieved, he couldn't possibly hope to eliminate them all at once. The 2 bases forcefully carved a bloody path through the crowd, and everyone fled in the few remaining armored vehicles. Seeing this, Wu Huairen, who had been cutting through the shelter, also had to give up and tried to flee on foot, but Zhang Yi had already set his sights on this threat to the shelter's security. As soon as Wu Huairen came into Zhang Yi's shooting angle, a bullet pierced his head, effectively eliminating any future threat to the shelter. In the end, probably only about 100 soldiers from the 2 bases managed to escape the encirclement, leaving behind countless bodies and vehicles as they fled eastward in disarray. Zhang Yi and the people from the snow worship sect did not plan to pursue them. After all, the snow worship sect had arrived on foot, and Zhang Yi understood the wisdom of not pursuing a desperate enemy to the end. Jing Yixian watched them disappear into the distance and began to shout with raised arms, "We won! We have won!" This was their first ever victory against the bases, and some people even embraced each other excitedly. Zhang Yi silently put away his sniper rifle. This chaotic battle not only destroyed the ice and snow defense line that took days to build, but also flattened the surrounding buildings, including the villa where Uncle Yu and Chun Lei lived. Zhang Yi watched the snow worship sect followers celebrating their victory together, and he even felt the urge to throw a pile of explosives at them. Those thoroughly brainwashed cult followers were terrifying, with their fearless fighting style making Zhang Yi deeply wary. He even thought that these reckless individuals were more dangerous than the base forces. However, Zhang Yi ultimately suppressed the impulse. He also knew that the snow worship sect's greatest resource was its people. Killing more of their followers would be futile, as they would quickly replenish their numbers through proselytizing, and he would only gain another enemy by by doing so, which wouldn't be worth it. After going downstairs, Zhang Yi immediately called Xing Tian to tell him, "You can come over to take the remaining food," but Xing Tian quickly replied, "No rush, we still have some things to handle." This surprised Zhang Yi. What else could this guy have to do? But considering that Emerald Waterside had kept their promise this time, he didn't pay it much mind. Zhang Yi stepped out of the shelter to start cleaning up the battlefield. At this time, Uncle Yu and Chun Lei were nearly exhausted, and even Flower was panting heavily and lying on the snow. Only Lian Yu stood still in front, her gaze determinedly fixed on the direction in which the two bases had fled. Zhang Yi walked over and patted Lian Yu on the shoulder. "It's over. You've killed so many of their base's people. You've avenged your students. It's time to let go." Hearing this, the murderous look in Lian Yu's eyes seemed to melt away instantly. Suddenly, her eyes closed and her body began to lean back weakly. Zhang Yi immediately supported her against himself, and only then did he notice a deep wound on Lian Yu's body. Zhang Yi's expression sharpened, and he quickly picked up Lian Yu and ran towards the shelter, thinking that her reckless charge into the enemy crowd, slashing through the allied forces of the two bases like chopping vegetables, must have attracted a lot of fire, and it was a miracle she was still alive. Zhang Yi rushed into the shelter and called out to Zhou Keir, "Hurry to the medical room and prepare for surgery." Zhou Keir was also startled by the wound on Lian Yu's body. She quickly prepared medical instruments and medicine and immediately began to stop the bleeding and suture the wound. Then, Zhang Yi stepped out of the shelter again. It was time to deal with the aftermath of the battle with the Snow Worship Sect and Emerald Waterside Base. The Snow Worship Sect also suffered heavy casualties this time, with even mutants among the dead. Zhang Yi told Jing Yixin, "The territory of the former West Mountain Base is now mine, Zhang Yi's. Without my permission, no one is allowed to enter my domain." This battle also demonstrated the terrifying strength of Zhang Yi's team. Jing Yixin respectfully bowed to Zhang Yi and said, "Thank you for helping us win this war. According to our agreement, aside from missionaries, no one from the Snow Worship Sect will come near your West Mountain area." Zhang Yi also managed to smile and said, "Of course, I hate fighting and killing. I am a pacifist, after all." After speaking, Jing Yixin, chanting prayers with his followers, drifted away. In Zhang Yi's view, the biggest beneficiary of this battle wasn't himself or the only idling Emerald Waterside Base, but the Snow Worship Sect. Without the two major bases to check them, the Snow Worship Sect could freely expand its followers. Coupled with their leader Yuan Kongya's blessing ability, their number of mutants is bound to increase rapidly. It's unimaginable how much their power will swell if this continues. Thinking of this, Zhang Yi sighed helplessly. "It seems I've nurtured a monster, but it looks like I had no choice." Then Zhang Yi quietly walked onto the battlefield to collect useful materials. The coalition forces had brought their elite, and their weapons and equipment were of high quality. Moreover, several mutants had died in this battle, and Zhang Yi planned to absorb some. But he found it strange that although he had seen 7 mutants killed, only 4 bodies were relatively intact. The other 3 had been hollowed out as if their essence had been extracted beforehand. This puzzled Zhang Yi greatly. Given the intensity of the recent battle, it seemed unlikely anyone could have done this, but there was no other explanation at the moment. After collecting them all into his pocket dimension, he turned to head back to the shelter. Zhang Yi said to his old friends with a smile, "Let's go back and rest up. We'll have a big celebration tonight." At that moment, Flower jumped onto Zhang Yi's shoulder and affectionately rubbed against him. In this battle, Flower had been indispensable, having crushed countless enemies in its transformed state. Zhang Yi also affectionately stroked Flower's head. Then with his left arm around Uncle Yu and his right around Chun Lei, the 3 of them walked back into the shelter arm in arm. Not far from the shelter, on a snowy plain, Xiao Holian and Wei Dinghai, leading the remnants of their defeated forces, fled here in disarray. Wei Dinghai, infuriated, recognized that this battle had severely weakened them, with their base's military strength nearly halved. He had been slashed in the chest by Lian Yu, and his rage exacerbated his injury. Xiao Holian was also seething with anger. She was not surprised by the Snow Worship Sect's betrayal, but she couldn't understand why Emerald Waterside Base had also sided with Zhang Yi. If the Xing Tian Corps from Emerald Waterside had joined them, the situation would not have been so dire. Thinking this, Xiao Holian couldn't help but want to make a satellite call to Xing Tian to thoroughly question him. But at that moment, Wei Dinghai suddenly stopped her. "Don't act rashly." Wei Dinghai analyzed somberly. "Xing Tian and his forces did not attack us like the Snow Worship Sect did, so I suspect that Zhang Yi offered him some benefits to keep him from taking action. Those guys have always skulked in the north of Heavenly Sea City, never daring to risk themselves. Plus, this guy is quite slippery, a clown who would be very happy with some benefits. If he can gain something without fighting, he'd definitely be pleased." Xiao Holian still angrily said, "I had a clear agreement with him before. It's because of his betrayal that we misjudged the strength of our opponent. We can't just let this go." At this, Wei Dinghai sighed and said, "Now that both you and I are severely weakened, do you think going after Xing Tian for an explanation will get you anywhere? I think we're lucky if they don't kick us while we're down." But just as he finished speaking, a piercing roar suddenly came from behind them, sounding like an avalanche, or as if thousands of troops were charging towards them. Wei Dinghai and Xiao Holian's faces changed flinched simultaneously, and then they saw Xing Tian blocking their path with hundreds of his men. Xing Tian, sitting atop a demonic hound, laughed loudly and said, "Xiao Honglian, Wei Dinghai, why the rush to leave?" Seeing this, Xiao Honglian stiffly said, "Xing Tian, it was you who first broke our agreement. What do you mean by blocking our way now?" Xing Tian's mouth twisted into a cold smirk and said, "Don't you both know my intentions? Both of you are wealthy landlords, so it's not too much for me to collect a toll, right?" Faced with Xing Tian's blatant robbery, both bases were furious yet dared not speak out. Wei Dinghai then bluffed somewhat. "Brother Xing Tian, I can't understand why you didn't join the fight today. If our 3 bases had joined forces to take down the shelter, the entire West Mountain area would have been ours. By staying in the middle and doing nothing, did you already figure out Zhang Yi's true strength?" Xing Tian casually cleared his ears and said lightly, "Our Emerald Waterside base doesn't have the capacity to govern extensively. Unlike you, we don't have ample resources and transportation. In the end, we would just be making the wedding dress for others, gaining nothing ourselves. Zhang Yi, however, offered us 10 tons of food to stage this play. Why wouldn't I agree? He gives me 10 tons of food for doing nothing, while you offer me empty promises for risking my life. Even a fool knows which to choose." Xing Tian's words left them speechless. In fact, they indeed harbored such ulterior motives, having secretly planned how to divide the high-quality resources of the West Mountain area, none of which would have gone to their Emerald Waterside base. Suddenly, Xing Tian's expression changed as he said, "But back to the matter at hand. Now let's talk about the toll fee, shall we?" Meanwhile, inside the shelter, Yang Mi was extremely exhausted from continuously using her abilities to produce food. Zhang Yi didn't ask her to cook, but instead took out a full table of delicious food from his pocket dimension, planning to properly celebrate this hard-won victory. Then, Zhang Yi took a hamburger and a cup of milk tea to the medical room. Zhou Qi had just finished surgery on Liang Yu, whose injuries were very serious, but the surgery was successful. Since she is a strength-enhanced mutant, her recovery ability is far above normal, so she should heal quickly. At this moment, Zhang Yi finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that this woman was really tough. However, Zhang Yi understood this. Her desperate fighting was purely sustained by a fervent desire for revenge, persisting until the end before she collapsed. Zhou Qi somewhat admiringly said, "The abilities of mutants are really strong. I truly admire Teacher Liang." Zhang Yi laughed. He knew that Zhou Qi was eyeing the frost essence. However, since they still knew too little about the snow worship sect, he was not yet willing to use it on Zhou Qi. Zhang Yi affectionately pinched Zhou Qi's sulking face and said, "Your medical skills are much more useful than any ability. I can do without a mutant, but I can't lose you as a doctor. In my heart, you are the most important." Meanwhile, at the Celestial Tribute area, the headquarters of the snow worship sect, Yuan Kongya was leading a group of followers, waiting in the snow for the triumphant return of their warriors. This battle was a gamble on the future of the snow worship sect, but fortunately, Jing Yixin did not fail her mission, returning with half of the warriors to the snow worship sect. He reported to the leader Yuan Kongya, "Although we also sacrificed many followers this time, we achieved a significant victory. Morning Dew and Radiant Prosperity bases have been severely damaged by us. They are now greatly weakened and will no longer be able to pose a threat to us in the future." As soon as these words were spoken, there was an immediate outburst of cheers and jubilation. The snow worship sect had long suffered at their large base, and this time they finally won a victory, marking a historic moment for them. Yuan Kongya stepped forward and took Xing Yixin's hand, saying, "You have worked hard, and the snow god will not forget your contributions." At this moment, Xing Yixin said with some guilt, "This time, we also lost many devout followers, including 2 mutant priests, Lin Fei and Meng Ziyuan." Yuan Kongya, holding her chest with a tender expression, said, "They did not die in vain. They have returned to my body, and now I can feel their presence." Xing Yixin spoke with a complex look in his eyes. "May every departed soul be with the leader." Then Yuan Kongya's eyes suddenly took on a sinister look, and she said excitedly, "We can finally preach freely in Heavenly Sea City. I want the light of the snow god to cover every corner of Heavenly Sea City, then the entire realm, and eventually unify the whole world. I want the snow god to become the only true god in the world, and the glory of the snow worship sect to last forever." With that, all the followers devoutly placed their right hands on their chests, and together with Yuan Kongya, they shouted in unison, "The glory of the snow worship sect will last forever. Long live the snow worship sect." Just after the Battle of the 5 Armies, Zhang Yi also made a name for himself, and no one dared to disturb them easily anymore. The shelter experienced a period of peace. The women started playing mahjong, Uncle Yu and Zhang Yi began playing chess, and Chun Lei and Lu Karen spent their days gaming. Even Liang Yu, who had been seriously injured, could now move around normally with her bandages. After this roller coaster of events, Liang Yu's temperament had also undergone a significant change. The indecisiveness of the past had disappeared without a trace, replaced by a subdued indifference. She merely nodded in response to others' concern. The reticence in her seemed to have a detached realization about life. Zhang Yi was familiar with this. When he had discovered his own rebirth, he felt much the same as she did now. The battle had leveled the surrounding villas, so Zhang Yi simply had everyone move into the shelter. Having been through life and death together together multiple times, a certain level of trust had been established among everyone. Plus, no one knew if war would break out again, so it was safest for everyone to live together. Everyone in the shelter was enjoying a rare contented life, gradually becoming more relaxed to the point that no one even bothered to repair the damaged ice and snow defense line, and the thousands of bodies left from the battle were ignored. But one morning, as Zhang Yi came to the window to enjoy the snowy scenery, he suddenly noticed something odd about the scene in front of him. Although the snowfall varied, shouldn't it be too clean? The battle had only ended a week ago. How could there not be a single body in sight? Zhang Yi frowned and muttered to himself after some thought, I clearly remember seeing quite a few just yesterday afternoon. Could someone have secretly dealt with them? Zhang Yi took out his binoculars and carefully searched again, confirming it wasn't a trick of his eyes, nor were the bodies covered by the heavy snow. They indeed seemed to have vanished into thin air. Zhang Yi was startled. This world can no longer be explained by common sense. Creatures can mutate and gain abilities. Could the bodies have undergone some kind of mutation too? Zhang Yi took a sharp intake of breath, but still, he put on his combat suit and decided to go out and investigate. Holding his pistol, Zhang Yi stepped outside step by step. The bodies that had once piled up like mountains were now nowhere to be seen. Thousands of bodies had disappeared overnight. As he approached, Zhang Yi finally discovered some clues. The dense footprints on the ground only pointed in the direction of departure, with no traces of outsiders coming in. That is to say, these bodies might have stood up and walked away on their own. Just then, Zhang Yi felt a sudden chill behind him, as if something cold and dark was staring at him. But when he turned around abruptly, there was nothing unusual behind him. Zhang Yi immediately felt a shiver down his spine, even a sense of fear. Nevertheless, he took a deep breath and encouraged himself. Don't panic at a time like this. I've killed countless living beings. Even if there really is something foul, what harm can it do to me? Zhang Yi gathered his courage and followed the direction of the footprints, which were headed east. Zhang Yi didn't dare continue following them and soon returned to the shelter. He asked Yang Mi, who had just finished making breakfast, to call everyone. Quickly, everyone dressed lightly and gathered in the living room, growing tense at the sight of Zhang Yi in his combat gear. Zhang Yi spoke up. What I'm about to tell you, please don't be scared. Adjust your breathing and prepare yourselves mentally. I just went outside and discovered something very strange. More than 1,000 bodies outside the shelter disappeared overnight, and it's very likely that they stood up and walked away on their own. As soon as he said this, the temperature in the living room seemed to drop several degrees, especially among the women, who widened their eyes in shock. Show Kier, pale-faced, said in a trembling voice, Zhang Yi, that's not a funny joke. It's too scary. Being a doctor, she refused to believe in such messy, foul things. Zhang Yi shook his head and said, I didn't want to believe it either, but the fact is right before our eyes. You can go and see for yourselves. Zhang Yi reassured them. Since this is already an era filled with mutated creatures, all sorts of strange occurrences aren't so unusual anymore. Let's not jump to conclusions. After breakfast, anyone who can fight, come out with me to investigate. After breakfast, several people changed into their gear and drove following the direction of the footprints, which eventually converged at an entrance to a cave and mysteriously disappeared. Zhang Yi and his group got out of the car and hurried forward, only to see a huge and profound cave on the snow-covered ground, a dark abyss without a trace of light, giving off a terrifying illusion of devouring everything. Chun-Lei couldn't help but murmur, what in the world is this thing, and why would those bodies come here? Could it be that some force is driving them? Behind him, Liang Yu also said, nowadays, the manifestations of abilities might be beyond our understanding, but if someone could control so many bodies to come here from tens of kilometers away, that mutant's strength must be incredibly powerful. Everyone at the scene fell into silence. Since the advent of the extreme cold apocalypse, at least 20 million people in Heavenly Sea City had died. If someone truly had such a capability, they could easily obliterate any force. Chun-Lei, shivering, said, could this be the legendary zombies? Zhang Yi shook his head. If it were really zombies, it would be easier to handle. With our current capabilities, do you think zombies would still be a threat? We're not even afraid of armed living people. What's to fear from slow-moving, walking corpses? Zhang Yi crouched down to examine the footprints and said, how are these walking footprints formed? Under such temperatures, the bodies should have frozen stiff by now. They should be moving by hopping forward, not walking like normal people. This doesn't make sense. While they were discussing, Uncle Yu looked around and suddenly said, this place looks somewhat familiar, like it's a subway station. Through the nearby residential areas, Uncle Yu slowly confirmed his guess. This station should be named Next Channel Garden Station. At this moment, Zhang Yi realized, no wonder this cave looks so unfathomably deep. It actually leads directly to a subway tunnel. Liang Yu frowned and said, could it be that something in the subway tunnel is controlling these bodies? Uncle Yu asked, so, what do we do about this cave? They absorbed over 1,000 bodies in one night, so there must be a terrifying number of bodies inside. What if this person becomes our enemy one day? Then we'd definitely be in for a beating, right? At this point, Zhang Yi waved his hand and said, let's pull back for now. Pretend we didn't see anything. They haven't come into conflict with us yet, and if we can't beat them, we'll just avoid them. As Zhang Yi motioned for everyone to retreat, Liang Yu asked puzzledly, are we just going to leave the body issue unresolved? If it it continues to develop, won't it eventually affect us? Zhang Yi's lips curled up into a mischievous smile. Let's not bother with it for now. After all, even if there really is a problem, definitely won't be the most troubling for me. The Heavenly Sea City subway system is extensive and spreads throughout the city, and Lark Manor is on the city's edge, with this being the only nearby subway station. The subway lines within other powers' territories are much more complex. If any bizarre incidents were to happen, they'd surely be the first to suffer. At this time, the Snow Worship sect was aggressively proselytizing within the territories of Radiant Prosperity and Morning Dew, attracting many survivors and followers, rapidly expanding the sect's scale in a somewhat chaotic manner. That day, Grand Cleric visited Yahello neighborhood again. Since receiving the Frost Essence and awakening his ability from Grand Cleric, Li Jian had been using bodies in combination with his own sacrifice ability to produce food, helping the several dozen people of Building 18 survive until now. The cost of gaining this ability was that everyone had to follow the Snow Worship sect. Seeing Grand Cleric arrive, Li Jian led all the neighbors of the building to greet him. Grand Cleric looked at Li Jian and smiled warmly. It seems that you are now able to use the ability given by the Snow God quite well. Li Jian and the people shouted together, "Praise the Snow God, praise the great leader, and thank Grand Cleric for allowing us to receive the leader's blessing so that we could survive until now." Grand Cleric nodded with a smile. His gaze passed over Li Jian and lingered for a moment on Li Jian's son, Li Kale, before retracting. "I have good news for you. You have passed the assessment and can now move to the Celestial Tribute area to live with the leader and all the followers." Hearing this, Li Jian and the others looked perplexed. They had gotten used to living in Yahello neighborhood, and now that they were barely self-sufficient, they were reluctant to change their situation lightly. Grand Cleric saw their concerns and smiled. "Don't worry, that place is a paradise in the apocalypse. All members of our Snow Worship sect are there, and soon it will become a utopia unaffected by the apocalypse. You were chosen, and that's why you are qualified to live there. Moreover, I have mentioned you to the leader. She appreciates your abilities and thinks they are crucial for the development of the Snow Worship sect. So as long as you go, you and your family will receive special care." Hearing this, Li Jian was astonished, as this fit perfectly with his ideal post-apocalyptic life. Building 18 had long idolized the Snow Worship sect, already considering it a sacred place. After all, they had survived thus far by the blessings of the leader, and now to be personally named by the leader was an immense honor. Li Jian excitedly fell to his knees. "I am willing to go. I, Li Jian, am willing to offer my humble efforts for the Snow Worship sect." Grand Cleric was also pleased with Li Jian's attitude. "Hurry and pack up. Follow me to the Snow Worship sect's headquarters." After a long half-day trek, the more than 50 survivors from Building 18 arrived at the Snow Worship sect. At this time, the Snow Worship sect was unprecedentedly flourishing, and the heavy snow seemed unable to cover the intense signs of life here. Grand Cleric stopped Li Jian. "Come with me first. The leader wants to meet you personally." Li Jian was nervous, but he didn't forget about his family. "What about my wife and son?" Grand Cleric smiled. "Don't worry, we will arrange everything for you." Even his wife stepped forward to encourage him. "Being summoned personally by the leader is a good thing. Don't worry about us." Amid the envious gazes of everyone around, Li Jian walked towards the grand church. Pushing open the church doors, Li Jian discovered that the leader was actually a woman. "Don't pay too much attention to external appearances. It's merely a vessel for the divine." Li Jian quickly bowed. "I pay my respects to you, leader. My name is Li Jian, and I am fortunate to have survived until now by receiving your blessing." Yuan Konya walked over and put her arm around Li Jian's shoulder, saying, "Grand Cleric has told me about the form of your ability. You represent hope for the living. I have decided to appoint you as a priest of the Snow Worship sect. Your arrival signifies a harvest, guided here by the divine. You also have your own mission to fulfill." Hearing this, Li Jian was filled with fervor. He was a chosen one of the divine, with a special mission. Li Jian immediately knelt down and shouted loudly, "I am willing to give everything for the Snow Worship sect." Yuan Konya nodded in satisfaction and said, "Come with me." Soon after, they arrived at an abandoned building, and suddenly, an immensely large plant stood before Li Jian. Before Li Jian could express his surprise, Yuan Konya said, "This is the sacred tree of our Snow Worship sect. Its roots can reach hundreds of meters underground to draw nutrients and eventually bear fruit. This fruit is the main source of food for the Snow Worship sect, and it represents our hope for survival." As she spoke, Yuan Konya handed Li Jian a blood-red fruit, looking at him with a slightly eerie expression, and asked, "Would you like to try it?" Li Jian was still reeling from the shock, having never seen such a bizarre and huge plant before, and its fruit resembled apples yet was not quite the same. Li Jian took the fruit, and instantly a marvelous fragrance wafted into his nose, a tempting aroma unlike anything he had ever smelled before. As if possessed, he began to devour the fruit in large bites, and a viscous liquid, similar to blood, trickled from the corners of his mouth. After eating the fruit, Li Jian immediately felt full of strength, and his feelings of hunger and cold vanished instantly. Yuan Konya told Li Jian, "Your ability can promote the growth of plants, and this sacred tree now needs more nutrients to grow stronger, so we can have more fruit to sustain more followers." Li Jian nodded vigorously quickly and replied, "I will follow the mission of the snow god." Then, with a dazed look in his eyes, he walked up to the great tree, pulled out a dagger, and with a swipe cut his finger. It was just a shallow cut, but his blood flowed like water, and the sacred tree extended its roots to greedily absorb every drop, causing the entire tree to emit a dazzling green glow. Yuan Kongya did not let him continue to bleed. She walked over and used her ability to stop the bleeding. She told Li Jian, "From now on, the mission of nourishing the snow worship sect's sacred tree will be entrusted to you." Li Jian nodded, his eyes shining with a sense of glory, as if blood sacrificing to the sacred tree was his supreme honor. Time quickly passed, and half a month went by. Zhang Yi repaired the ice and snow defenses, and everyone began to enjoy life in the shelter. However, Zhang Yi remained vigilant, dedicating time each day to practice martial arts with Liang Yu. Under his influence, the others in the shelter also did not slack off. Uncle Yu engaged in strength training daily. Yang Mi did not stop creating food with her abilities, and even the usually lazy Chun Lei began practicing boxing. Since the Battle of the Five Armies, Chun Lei began to feel a sense of crisis. He had encountered Wei Dinghai, who possessed a more powerful ice and snow ability than his, and upon learning that Liang Yu also had the ability to devour mutants, Chun Lei became uneasy. Now, Zhang Yi, Liang Yu, and Flower all had such abilities, while he and Uncle Yu did not. This indicated that he was among those with lesser talents. Given Uncle Yu's close relationship with Zhang Yi, this made him feel like he was at the bottom of the hierarchy. Therefore, he was also eager to break through, to avoid being a burden to the shelter. After all, Zhang Yi was not the type to coddle the useless. Seeing Chun Lei's earnest efforts, Zhang Yi came over to share his own training insights. Physical strength is particularly important for abilities, but the mind is the most important. Zhang Yi pointed to his head and said, "Abilities are just our weapons in combat. It's important to enhance the strength of these weapons, but what's crucial is the mind that wields them. Just like how a stone thrown by a master can do more damage than a bullet fired by an ordinary person." Hearing this, it was like an enlightenment for Chun Lei. He had always been too fixated on the strength of abilities, but recalling how their leader had defeated Ling Feng, it was a case of the weak overcoming the strong. With this realization, Chun Lei's perspective suddenly broadened. He thought that although he didn't have the ability to devour other mutants, if he could develop his own abilities to their fullest extent, that should also be sufficiently powerful. Yang Xinxin had been continuously gathering intelligence, and she reported to Zhang Yi about the current situation of the major powers. She had successfully hacked into the networks of several forces, quietly observing all their movements. The network capabilities of Emerald Waterside and Snow Worship Sect were low, and they didn't even have dedicated cybersecurity personnel, making it incredibly easy to hack into their networks. Morning Dew and Radiant Prosperity had higher levels of network defense, and while she couldn't yet breach their core network areas, monitoring their daily activities was still manageable. Recently, it seems that Emerald Waterside Base has chosen to remain in isolation, showing no intention to expand outward. Morning Dew Base's Wei Dinghai has been seriously injured and has been contracting his defenses, even facing internal rebellion. The Dominion of Radiant Prosperity Base remains stable, thanks also to their oil refinery, which was not affected. As for the Snow Worship Sect, as the biggest beneficiary of the Battle of the Five Armies, they are frantically expanding their followers, undergoing disorderly growth. At the same time, within the ruins of West Mountain Base, the thick iron door of the fourth life pod suddenly made a loud noise. After several muffled sounds, with a bang, the door was smashed open. In the dark space, zombies with vacant eyes densely filled the entire passage.